Okay, here we are for our module on ritual. Let me start by saying that if you take like another class with like a 1240 class with me, an intro to Anthro, when we get to the religion section, I'll go, wow, we could spend a whole semester talking about religion. And now that you're going to spend a whole semester talking about religion, we get to something like symbols or we get to something like myths or something like ritual. And I say, well, we could spend a whole semester talking about rituals. And that's because this is a couple things. One, it's a cultural universal. It's something that shows up everywhere. So there's a lot of information about it. And two, it's one of the things that intrigued the early ethnographers. It's one of those things what an ethnographer named James Fernandez once called hyper-relevatory moments. Moments when everybody is sort of in agreement. Kind of like Durkheim called it effervescence. Everyone's in agreement about this is important. How often do people cooperate together the way they do in rituals? Not very often. There's something very special about rituals and that kind of group behavior, and that's intrigued anthropologists since the beginning of the discipline. So to begin with, I want to introduce this fella, Anthony Wallace. You've come across his name already in your reading and some of the other lectures. There's a picture of him. An interesting thing, when I took anthropology, there literally was no internet. There was an internet, but nobody used it. And it was really hard to actually figure out what anthropologists look like. I know that seems like a strange thing, but you all live in a digital age where we have a lot of access to visual information, and we didn't have it. So I didn't actually know what Anthony Wallace looked like. So I was kind of surprised when I saw a picture of him, because he looks like one of my friends, actually. But he passed away several years ago, about 10 years ago, maybe longer than that. And he was a very, very important writer about religion and anthropology. But he did write mostly in the 60s and 70s, and that's important to remember because sometimes some of the stuff that he says and writes about almost seems a little bit naive because it's all been studied so much since he wrote about it. But he was one of the first ones to write about it. The other thing is that he wrote some really great ethnohistory, and that's really what he's known as an ethnohistorian of the East Coast indigenous groups primarily. But this quote here, which I'm not going to read to you, you can read it as I'm talking, but I just want to kind of point out there's two things I really like about this. The first is the obvious one, is that he's pointing something out that I hope that you're going to come to understand this semester, is that writing is really, really key to understanding things. And I'm very pleased that I feel like people do understand that at taking online classes. And you understand that I can't understand you if you don't write about it. But more importantly, maybe don't understand it until you write about it yourself. And believe me, I have proven that to myself over and over again, writing content for these classes. But the other thing I liked about this quote, is this idea that there's these discontinuities in the data or in our thinking. And there's places where things just don't seem to line up. Things where you go, well, maybe that definition doesn't fit with another definition, or maybe I'm using that word to define itself, or little things where it just doesn't quite seem to line up. And what he's pointing at is that one, it has to line up in our heads, but it's lining up in our thinking. It is lining up in our heads, and we are bringing it to life through our writing. And I have some other great quotes about Anthony Wallace about bringing things to life through action. So that's one thing to think about. And also just to remember that we're going to come across discontinuities. You're going to see things and you'll go, well, seems a little different. Or now, is this A kind of ritual or a B kind of ritual? Or they both kind of seem more like C kind of rituals to me, or things like that. And just be aware of that that's not just you. That's kind of how reality is when you try to sort it out and when you try to make sense of it, specifically in writing. So that's part of our exercise, and that's part of the fun, I think, in a class like this. So I say that because now we're going to try to look at some definitions, and I really only just scratched the surface with these definitions. I'll start with the one that you've already been exposed to, and that's from Stein and Stein from our textbook, that says there are patterned and recurring sequences of events. And I wrote the word secular ritual there next to Moore and Meyerhoff because they wrote a very famous ethnographic piece about secular rituals, and they analyzed basically a birthday party at a retirement home. And they said, well, this looks a lot like a ritual, and it fits a lot of the characteristics of a ritual. And so, do actually rituals have to be sacred? Do they have to be religious? That's a question that maybe we'll come back to later in the semester. But for now, I want to think about them purely from a religious point of view, because we are doing the anthropology of religion. So let's think about that. A pattern, recurring sequence of events. It needs to have a little bit more to it than that, I think, because to me, brushing my teeth is a pattern, recurring sequence of events. Now, some might say that that is a ritual. Horace Minor, in his Body Rituals of the Nasarima, famous article, says that is actually a ritual. I'm not sure. Let's explore that with this PowerPoint presentation and with the films that we watch, and we'll think about that when it's all said and done.